They say the path of the sword is a lonely road, a narrow ridge between life and death where only the resolute can walk without falling. But in the land of Wano, where the rivers run with poison and the sky is choked by the smoke of factories, the road does not just narrow, it breaks. We remember Roronoa Zoro as the unbreakable shield of the future pirate king, a man who would bow to no one, who would swallow his pride only for the sake of his captain. But destiny is as fickle as the Grand Line weather. What if the weight of Wano was too heavy? What if the iron bars of Udon broke not the body but the philosophy? Imagine a timeline where the moss-green haramaki is traded for the black leather of a beast, where the three swords do not sing for liberation but scream for dominance. This is not a story of betrayal born of malice, but of a desperate bargain made in the dark, a realization that to cut down a dragon one might first have to grow scales. It is the tragedy of the King of Hell, realizing that the only way to protect his captain's dream was to wake up from it and step into a nightmare. Here, the promised Aquina is drowned in the bottom of a sake cup poured by Kaido himself. Before we descend into this abyss where loyalty and ambition bleed into one, join our voyage by subscribing, so these legends of what might have been are never washed away by the tides of time. The air in Udon Prison did not taste of air. It tasted of iron and old blood, a stale cocktail of despair trapped beneath the earth. Here, the sun was a rumor, a distant memory that the prisoners of the land of Wano had long ceased to believe in. In the deepest cell, where the darkness was thick enough to choke a man, Roronoa Zoro sat in silence. Chains the size of ship anchors bound his arms and legs, the cold steel biting into flesh that had already weathered 1,000 storms. But it was not the weight of the chains that pressed down on him. It was the crushing silence of a defeat that had not yet happened but felt inevitable. The news had trickled down through the guards, whispered in mocking tones. The straw hat captain, the boy made of rubber and sunlight, had been swatted out of the sky by a single swing of a kanabo, one blow. That was the value of their revolution. In the canon of history we know Zoro would have raged. He would have meditated, turning his will into a blade to sever the shackles. But in this timeline, the darkness of Wano whispered a different truth. The damp walls of the cells seemed to echo with the mockery of the world, that dreams were fragile things easily crushed by those with the strength to trample them. Zoro closed his one eye, seeking the clarity of the sword, but all he saw was the image of his captain falling over and over again, a god struck down by a monster. The path to the title of world's greatest swordsman felt suddenly impossibly steep, a mountain he was trying to climb with broken hands. Then the ground shook. It was not an earthquake, but a heartbeat. The rhythmic, thunderous approach of an apex predator. The guards scattered like roaches exposed to light as the heavy iron door creaked open, groaning in protest. Standing there, filling the frame with a silhouette that blocked out the dim torches, was Kaido of the Beasts. He did not bring torture devices. He did not bring executioners. He brought a gourd of sake and 2 lacquer cups. The emperor walked into the cell, his presence so overwhelming that the air pressure seemed to drop, making it hard to breathe. He sat across from the bound swordsman, the ground cracking slightly beneath his weight. "They tell me you have not eaten," Kaido rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together in a landslide. "A waste! Hunger dulls the blade." He poured the sake, the liquid clear and sharp, the smell filling the stagnant cell. "I have seen your eyes, Roronoa. They are not the eyes of a follower. They are the eyes of a king who has forgotten how to rule." Kaido slid a cup across the stone floor. It stopped inches from Zoro's knee. "Your captain is a child playing at war. He believes that spirit alone can shatter mountains, but you know the truth, don't you? You have felt the steel of the world's strongest." Zoro remained silent, his breath hitching slightly. The emperor was not attacking his body. He was besieging his philosophy. Kaido took a long drink, wiping his mouth with the back of a hand that had crushed nations. Strength is not a tool, boy. Strength is the only truth. You seek to be the greatest, to stand above all others. You cannot do that standing in the shadow of a weak man. A sword that is sheathed in kindness will rust. If you want to cut the heavens, you must first be willing to sever your humanity. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Zoro looked at the cup. In the reflection of the sake, he didn't see a pirate hunter. He saw a failure. He saw the terror on the faces of his crew at Sabaody. He saw the blood on the deck. He saw the reality that despite 2 years of training, they were still prey in a sea of monsters. Kaido leaned forward, his eyes glowing with the intensity of a dragon staring down a tiger. I do not want a slave. I have enough of those useless things. I want a calamity. I want a right hand that understands the language of violence. Join me. Discard the straw hat. Wear the horns, and I will show you what it truly means to be the king of hell. The silence stretched for an eternity. The logic was terrifyingly sound. To protect the dream, one had to be strong enough to kill the nightmare. If Luffy could not do it, then Zoro had to become something else, something darker, something that didn't need hope, only power. Slowly, the haki that radiated from Zoro shifted. It lost its warmth, its heroic defiance. It became cold, sharp, and jagged. The chains rattled as he moved his hand not to strike but to reach out. His fingers curled around the sake cup. It was heavy, heavier than Wado Ichimonji, heavier than the promise to Kuina. But as he lifted it to his lips, the decision was made. The Roronoa Zoro who sailed for adventure died in that cell. The man who lowered the cup was a demon who had just sold his soul for the power to cut the world in half. The moon over Onigashima did not shine. It glared, a pale, unblinking eye watching the debauchery below. Inside the skull dome, the air was a thick, humid haze of roasting dinosaur meat, cheap gunpowder, and the sour tang of sweat. This was not a ship. It was a den. The beast pirates did not function as a crew, but as an ecosystem of violence, a churning pit where the strong ate the weak and the weak thanked them for the privilege. In the center of the performance floor, amidst the raucous laughter of 5,000 drunken beasts, sat a man who drank in silence. Roronoa Zoro was no longer the wandering Ronin in green. He was draped in the dark, heavy furs of the northern wastes, black leather binding his chest where the scar from Mihawk throbbed with a phantom ache. The harakiri blade was gone, replaced by a serrated cutlass taken from a fallen headliner, though Wado Ichimonji still rested at his hip, a pearl of purity drowning in a sea of filth. He did not look like a man held captive. He looked like a disaster waiting to happen. The lower-ranking gifters, twisting with the grotesque mutations of artificial fruits, gave him a wide berth. They could smell the predator on him, a scent sharper than the sulfur of the volcano. "Fresh meat thinks he's royalty," a voice sneered. It was a headliner, a man whose arm was a snarling wolf, confident in his rank and drunk on the emperor's favor. The music in the hall dimmed, the fiddle players hesitating as the crowd sensed blood. The headliner kicked over Zoro's sake bottle, the liquid pooling on the dirty floor like spilled lifeblood. "Kaido-sama might have let you live, samurai, but down here you bow to the hierarchy. You're nothing but a stray dog with 3 swords. In the old world, the world of sunlight and laughter, Zoro would have smirked. He would have delivered a witty retort, a challenge wrapped in arrogance. But that man was dead in Udon. The Zoro who sat there now did not smile. He did not blink. He slowly reached for the fallen bottle, his movements fluid and heavy like mercury. "Hierarchy," Zoro whispered, the words scraping against his throat. "A ladder for rats." The air pressure in the room plummeted. Before the headliner could draw a breath to shout, a line of black light dissected the space between them. There was no shout of a technique name, No honorable announcement of a duel. There was simply the sound of a sheath clicking back into place. The headliner stood frozen for a heartbeat, eyes wide with confusion, before his top half slid sickeningly from his bottom half. The wolf arm whined and died. Blood sprayed across the faces of the jeering crowd, silencing the thousands. Zoro did not stand up. He did not wipe the blood from his cheek. He simply lifted the half-empty bottle and took a long, burning pull. The message was etched into the floor in crimson. This was not a recruit. This was a usurper. High above, on the balcony that overlooked the chaos, the All-Stars watched. Queen the Plague leaned over the railing, his cigar glowing in the gloom, his mechanical neck extending with a whir of gears. My, he chuckled, though the sound lacked its usual mirth. That glare, it's nasty. He's not here to serve, is he? Beside him, standing like a dark monolith, was King the Wildfire. The flames on his back flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against his mask. He watched the swordsmen below. The way the lesser pirates shrank away, the way Zoro's aura seemed to devour the light around him. It was a familiar hunger. It was the hunger of a man who realized that honor was a shackle and power was the key. "He is climbing," King said, his voice muffled and cold. "Let him climb. The higher he goes, the harder he falls when he reaches the sun." Down in the pit, Zoro felt their gaze. He looked up, his single eye locking onto the three calamities standing in the rafters. He felt the demonic pull of Enma on his hip, the sword humming in delight at the carnage. He had traded his freedom for strength, and now he had to prove the transaction was worth it. He wouldn't just join the beast pirates. He would consume them. He would sharpen his fangs on their bones until he was sharp enough to cut fate itself. The liquor burned going down, but it didn't burn enough to numb the memory of a straw hat floating on the water. The raid on Onigashima was not a battle. It was a collision of eras. The night sky burned orange as the fire festival capitals below were eclipsed by the war above. Samurai roared against impossible odds, their blades clashing against the tough hides of the gifters. Through this maelstrom of fire and blood, Monkey D. Luffy was a bolt of lightning, a singular force of nature pressing upward toward the skull's rooftop, toward the emperor who sat on the throne of the world. Luffy ran with the desperate certainty of a man who believed that will alone could bend reality. He did not see the thousands of enemies. He only saw the face of the man he had to defeat. He burst onto the main performance floor, scattering beast pirates like bowling pins, his eyes fixed on the stairs leading up. "Kaido, I'm coming for your head," he bellowed, his voice shaking the rafters. But the path to the roof was not blocked by a calamity. It was blocked by a silhouette wrapped in the heavy, suffocating black furs of the northern seas. The figure stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, an island of terrible calm in a sea of violence. The lower-ranking pirates scrambled away, forming a terrified circle around the two figures, sensing a clash that would dwarf the surrounding war. Luffy skid to a halt, his sandals smoking on the stone floor. A grin bright as the sun broke across his face. "Zoro, you're here! Great! Out of the way, I gotta go kick Kaido's ass!" The figure did not move. Slowly, the head tilted up, revealing the single gray eye that held no warmth, no recognition, only a bottomless abyss of resolve. "You cannot pass, Straw Hat." The grin slid off Luffy's face like rain off a window pane. The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken history. The sake shared on the deck of the Going Merry, the vows made under the clear blue sky, the blood spilled for one another. "Zoro? What are you doing in those clothes? We have to hurry." "You don't understand the weight of this sea." Zoro's voice was a low growl vibrating through the floorboards. He drew Wado Ichimonji. The white blade, once a symbol of pure ambition, now seemed to weep in the firelight. "You think you can walk up there and challenge a god because you have a dream? That dream died in Udon, Straw Hat. It died when I realized a weak captain only leads his crew to the slaughter. Luffy's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine confusion and hurt replacing his usual fire. Weak? What are you talking about? I'm going to be king of the pirates. Then die like a king. Zoro moved faster than thought. There was no hesitation, no mercy in the strike. It was a killing blow aimed squarely at the heart of the boy he once called captain. Luffy instinctively hardened his arm with armament haki, throwing it up to block. Clang! The impact created a shockwave that blew the surrounding pirates off their feet. The ground beneath them cratered. It was not the clash of comrades sparring, it was the screeching collision of two tectonic plates of ideology. Luffy was driven to one knee, the sheer raw power behind Zoro's strike buckling his defenses. He looked up, past the sparking steel, into the eye of his first mate and saw a stranger. He saw the king of hell that Kaido had cultivated in the dark. Zoro, Luffy gasped, the weight of the blade pressing him down towards the dirt. Kaido is right, Zoro whispered, his face inches from Luffy's. The words meant only for him. Only power is absolute. If you cannot get past me, you have no business on that roof. I am doing you a kindness, Straw Hat. I am ending your dream before Kaido ends your life. Zoro twisted his blade. A surge of violent, uncontrolled haki pouring from Enma, forcing Luffy backward. The rubber captain tumbled, his beloved straw hat slipping from his head and landing softly in the dust of the battlefield. It lay there between them, a fragile crown of woven grass, a monument to a promise that had just been severed by the very sword sworn to protect it. The law of the beast pirates was written not in ink but in marrow. If you hunger for the throne, you must devour the one sitting on it. Zoro left the straw hat lying in the dust, not dead but spiritually dismantled, and turned his single eye toward the sky. The ceiling of the skull dome had been blown open by the war, revealing a bleeding twilight where dragons danced. But Zoro did not look at the dragons. He looked at the black-winged angel wreathed in flames who hovered above the carnage, looking down on the mortal struggle with ancient biological boredom. King the Wildfire, the sole survivor of the Lunarians, a god by birthright. Zoro ascended the burning rubble, his swords dragging sparks across the stone. He did not run. He stalked. The chaos of the live floor fell away, the noise of the rebellion fading into a dull roar beneath the pounding of his own heart. He reached the precipice, the wind howling around the exposed architecture of Onigashima, and pointed Enma at the sky. "Get down here," Zoro's voice cut through the wind, sharp and commanding. "Your perch is too high for a dinosaur." King stopped mid-flight. The flames on his back flared brighter, turning the air around him into a shimmering heat haze. He tilted his masked head, looking at the swordsman who had just struck down his own captain. "You are a strange creature, Roronoa," King said, his voice amplified by the mechanics of his suit. "You betrayed your heart to gain power, yet you still reek of desperation. Do you think swinging a sword makes you a king? I was born a god. You are merely a human playing with sharp objects." "Gods don't bleed," Zoro muttered, wrapping a bandana of black haki around his forehead, not the green cloth of his past, but a torn strip of a beast pirate banner. "Let's see if you do." King dove. He became a meteor, a streak of magma and ancient force crashing down with enough velocity to shatter the island. Zoro met him. The impact was not a sound, it was a silence that sucked the air out of the world, followed by a detonation that cracked the skull of Onigashima. The duel that followed was a violation of nature. King was speed and fire, a biological impossibility who could manipulate his body and the elements with fluid grace. He launched kicks that sliced through mountains, his imperial deep pride stake melting the rock into slag. Zoro was forced onto the defensive, his body screaming as he deflected attacks that carried the weight of a prehistoric era. His skin burned, his bones rattled, but his grip never wavered. "Is this the limit of your ambition?" King taunted, gripping Zoro's swords with his bare, magma-coated hands. "You sold your soul, and for what? To die in the dirt? Zoro gritted his teeth, blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. The logic of Udon returned to him. To cut the heavens, you must sever your humanity. He looked at King, at this being who claimed superiority by blood, and felt a surge of cold, demonic rage. He didn't need bloodlines. He needed hell. I don't need to be a god, Zoro exhaled, the breath visible as green smoke. I just need to be the one who kills them. Zoro released the restraints on Enma. The sword shrieked in delight, draining the haki from his arm until it looked like a withered husk, then flooding it back with necrotic power. Green flames erupted from his body, not the hot fire of King, but the cold, spiritual fire of the underworld. The King of Hell three-sword style was unleashed. He moved. He was no longer fighting the air, he was cutting the space where King existed. 103 Mercies Dragon Damnation. The attack was a blur of green lightning that dissected the magma. King's eyes widened behind his mask as he felt a chill he had never known. Fear. The ancient defense of the Lunarians, the fire that made them invincible, flickered and died before the sheer will of the swordsman. With a roar that sounded like a beast breaking its cage, Zoro slashed upward. The mask of the wildfire shattered. A wing, black and majestic, was severed from its body, spinning slowly into the abyss below. King fell, a fallen angel crash-landing into the ruins of the right brain tower. Zoro stood over the defeated calamity, his chest heaving, the green aura pulsing like a dying star. He did not sheath his swords. He looked at the fallen Okaban, then turned his gaze toward the highest peak of the skull, where Kaido waited. He had climbed the hierarchy. He was no longer a subordinate. He was the disaster that walked. The war did not end with a cheer. It ended with a shudder. The island of Onigashima groaning as it settled into the cracked earth of Wano's mainland. The artificial clouds of flame that had held the island aloft dissipated, leaving only the raw, weeping sky of the early morning. Silence, heavy and absolute, rushed in to fill the void where the roar of cannons and the screams of dragons had been. It was the silence of a graveyard, or perhaps a cathedral. On the precipice of the crumbling skull, where the wind smelled of ash and cooling magma, Roronoa Zoro sat alone. The black furs of the beast pirates were tattered, scorched by the fires of the Lunarian he had dismantled, hanging off his frame like the feathers of a molting crow. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his body a map of the violence he had endured, but he did not seem to notice the pain. He was staring at the horizon where the sun was beginning to bleed through the gray mist, painting the flower capital in hues of soft gold and bruised purple. He held Wado Ichimonji in his lap. The white scabbard was stained with soot, but the blade within remained pristine, a sliver of uncorrupted soul in a world he had willingly darkened. Below him, the survivors of the raid were emerging from the rubble. He could hear them. The sobbing reunions of the samurai, the confused murmurs of the liberated prisoners, and he could hear them, the straw hats. He heard the frantic voice of Chopper tending to the wounded. He heard the metallic clank of Frankie, and, faint but undeniable, the heartbeat of the drums of liberation. Luffy had risen. The captain had transcended his limits, not in spite of Zoro's betrayal, but because of it. By becoming the wall that Luffy could not climb, Zoro had forced the rubber boy to fly. He had played the role of the monster so perfectly that the hero had no choice but to be born. But a play once acted cannot be unwritten. Footsteps approached from behind, heavy, deliberate, dragging slightly. Zoro did not turn. He knew the rhythm of that walk. It was the cook. Sanji stopped 10 paces away, lighting a cigarette with a trembling hand. The smoke drifted past them, mingling with the smell of the dying fires. "They're celebrating down there," Sanji said, his voice devoid of its usual biting wit. It was hollow, exhausted. Luffy woke up. "He's asking for you. He says he knew." Zoro's grip on the white sword tightened, the knuckles turning white. "He's a fool." "Ah, Maybe, Sanji exhaled, a long plume of smoke escaping his lips. But he's the king's fool now. Kaido is down. The beast pirates are broken. You climbed the ladder, Marimo. You took the title of King of Hell, and you burned the hierarchy from the inside out. But look at you. Sanji's voice cracked, a rare fissure of emotion. You're wearing their skin. You smell like them. Someone had to, Zoro whispered, the words carried away by the wind. To kill a dragon, you have to enter its stomach. You can't cut it from the outside, Cook. The scales are too thick. And now? Sanji asked, the question hanging like a guillotine blade. Do you wash off the blood and come back to the sunny deck? Do you pretend you didn't look at us with the eyes of a predator? Zoro stood up slowly, his bones popping. He sheathed Wado Ichimonji, the click echoing with finality. He walked to the edge of the cliff, looking down at the path that led back to his friends, back to the light. Then he looked at the vast open sea beyond Wano, a gray, turbulent expanse that promised nothing but solitude. The path of the Asura was not a circle. It was a straight line into the dark. He had proven that his ambition was stronger than his loyalty, and in doing so, he had saved the loyalty by sacrificing the man who held it. He reached up and unclasped the heavy fur cloak, letting it slide from his shoulders. It fell into the abyss below, disappearing into the mist. But he did not turn back to Sanji. He did not turn back to Luffy. Tell him, Zoro said, his voice steady, the voice of a man who had made his peace with damnation. Tell him the seas are wide. Tell him that the greatest swordsman in the world waits for him at the end of the dream. But I cannot sail on a ship of sunlight. Not anymore. Zoro! Sanji shouted, stepping forward, the desperate plea of a brother watching part of his soul walk away. But the swordsman was already moving, walking along the precarious ridge of the skull, away from the victory party, away from the dawn. He walked with the heavy, rhythmic gait of a legend, a silhouette cutting through the morning fog. He had become the king of hell so that his captain could remain the god of the sun. It was the ultimate transaction, the checkmate of fate. As the sun finally broke fully over the horizon, illuminating the liberated land of Wano, the cliff edge was empty. There was only the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below, whispering a story that would be told in taverns and on ships for 1,000 years. The story of the green dragon, the demon who sat at the right hand of the beast to save the world, and then vanished into the mist, leaving behind only a liberated country and a broken heart. The sea remembered his name, even if the world was too afraid to speak it.